It was simply a work trip. One my mom had taken countless times before. She's used to airports, flights, and hotels. Nothing phases her. This trip felt like no different, except for one thing, an innocuous in-flight encounter that would turn terrifying. My mom finally sat down in her seat and got comfortable for the short flight to her destination. The gentleman sitting next to my mom was a fellow business traveler, smartly attired and carrying a briefcase. He smiled at her and introduced himself, and they struck up a casual conversation. They discussed their jobs and shared a few laughs, and by the time the flight had landed, they had exchanged business cards. Nothing unusual, just friendly networking. Later that night, after she had rested in her motel room, my mom wanted to unwind. She switched on the TV and was going to chill out after a very long day. The room was somewhat dark, the soft glow of the screen dancing across the walls. The motel wasn't anything special, one of those small stopovers where business people would travel down the highway to. You wouldn't think anything out of the ordinary could happen there. The only sound in the room was suddenly pierced by the ringing of the phone in her room. It was the front desk. "Hello, ma'am. Your husband is here and would like to inquire if we can give him a key to your room," said the front desk clerk, as casual as if this was the most normal request in the world. A chill ran down my mom's spine. Her husband wasn't there. As a matter of fact, he was hundreds of miles away, at home. Flummoxed and caught off guard, she stammered, "My husband? No, that's impossible. My husband isn't traveling with me." The clerk hesitated. "He says he's your husband. He even provided your room number." My mom's heart was racing. She asked the clerk to describe the man, and as the words came forth, her blood ran cold. The clerk described the man from the plane. The man she had just met a few hours ago. How did he know where she was staying? How did he find her room number? The fear was now fully upon her as she realized something. This man had been following her. Somehow, he had followed her from the airport to this motel. Perhaps he had seen her luggage tag, overheard her conversation, or just guessed where she was staying. Either which way, he had found her. She then informed the front desk in a firm tone of voice, "Do not give him a key. I don't know him. He is not my husband." The now concerned clerk promised to handle the situation and assured her that they wouldn't let him in. My mom hung up the phone. The beat in her heart was drumming loudly in her chest. She hastily double-checked the door for locks and pulled the curtains tight. The once innocuous motel room seemed like a prison, trapping her in with fear. The minutes ticked by, but each seemed like an eternity. Every groan of the hall outside her room made her jump. Was he out there? Was he trying to find another way in? Then came the knock, slow, calculated, and way too composed. "Ma'am? It's the front desk again. May I speak with you a second?" A voice called out from the other side of the door. But something wasn't quite right. The voice didn't sound exactly like it had belonged to the clerk from earlier. It was deeper, more rehearsed. She said nothing. She just stood in the middle of the room and listened closely. There was that knock again, this time louder. "Ma'am, please open the door. I just need to confirm something." Her instincts yelled for her to keep quiet, not utter a peep. She approached the phone to call the front desk herself. As she dialed, the knocks ceased, giving way to one long, cold silence. Still trembling, she stood by the phone, waiting for the clerk to answer. Finally, when he did, he assured her that nobody from the front desk had been sent to her room. Terrified, my mom explained what had happened. Straight away, the motel staff called the police, but he was long gone by the time they arrived. He had vanished into the night, leaving no trace behind him. The police took her statement and confirmed to her, though they never found the man. This was not the first time they had heard of such a scheme. Many times, casual encounters have been used by predators just to retrieve personal information later, to be used to feign some sort of connection with their victim. That night, she slept with the chair tucked under the door and the dresser pushed up against the window. Sleep never came. Her mind couldn't help but keep replaying how this man, so masterfully manipulative, could make what felt like a casual encounter into something premeditated and designed to get him into her room. To this date, she is more cautious than ever when traveling, always suspicious of any strangers she meets. The motel encounter made for a sobering reminder that the most innocuous of conversations may take terrifying turns, and you never can know who watches. Finally, after a grueling 5-day work event, I was heading out of the country. The past days had been one endless string of meetings and presentations, literally leaving me with just about 10 hours of sleep altogether. All I wanted was a bed that I could just collapse into, and I really was not fussy where I stayed. I pulled into some beat down motel just outside the airport. It seemed like the place hadn't been renovated in decades. The carpet was stained and the blankets felt damp against my skin, but exhaustion just rolled over me like a warm blanket. And besides, I didn't think twice about the state of the room. It was 8 p.m. local time, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know how long I'd been asleep, but at about 11 p.m., the motel phone rang and I woke up. My brain was groggy trying to work out what was going on. I reached over for the receiver. My heart was racing. "Hello?" The voice on the other side was that of the front desk clerk and sounded serious. "We've had a complaint about noise coming from your room." I stammered, exclaiming, "Impossible. I've been sleeping the whole time." "Are you sure?" the clerk pursued. "Could there be someone else with you in the room?" I was flummoxed, adamant with all candor. "No, I am alone here. There's really no one else making any noise." The clerk asked once more as if he wanted to get more from me. "Are you sure you are by yourself? Isn't there anybody else in your room?" "Yes, I am alone," I all but yelled, my exhaustion tipping over into exasperation. There was a slight pause, after which the clerk said, "Okay, we'll check on it." I dropped the receiver, my heart still racing, and fell back to sleep, restlessly. The call kept echoing in my head, but it was too much to think over while tired. The next morning, the sun was streaming through the window, and as I came to consciousness, that unsettling conversation from the night before replayed itself in my mind. The weirdness of the interaction still wouldn't shake off. There had been no noise in my room, none that I could hear anyway. And why would the staff need to make so many repetitions that I was alone? I showered and got ready to go, hoping the impending feeling of dread would leave me. As I was packing up, I saw the Do Not Disturb sign was still on the door. In falling asleep, I must have forgotten to take it off, meaning no one had knocked on my door. I casually asked the clerk at the front desk about the phone call from the night before. The clerk was stumped, looking and shook their head. "We didn't make any calls to your room last night. Are you sure it was us?" A chill went down my spine, but I answered. Someone said there was a complaint about noise. "Ma'am, I assure you, we haven't called you," the clerk kept saying, giving me such a hassled look. That was when it got clear that, well, it had to be someone else. Someone had actually dialed the call impersonating the front desk. A cold wave of fear whirled inside me. Was it an attempt to get the head count in the room? Probably looking for an easy target. I ran out of that motel, the heart in my chest racing. So glad I always used the extra latch chain lock on the door. I could only imagine what might have happened otherwise. I looked back once more, the screaming instincts telling me to get far away. I swore I saw the shadow of something behind the window of my room, just out of sight, watching me leave. From that day forward, I never stayed in any dives of motels again, nor was I ever to catch off guard, as I protected myself at all times, especially when I was alone. You can never know who might be lurking in the shadows. just waiting for the right opportunity to attack. Mom and I were driving through the vast emptiness of Texas on a road trip when I was 12. We had driven for hours, and as the sun began to set over the endless horizon, we stopped at a motel that looked decent enough from our guidebook. It was well-reviewed, cheap, so we gambled that this would be the place to stay for the night. This was an older version of a motel, with its neon lights flickering in the night's air. An air conditioning unit rattled ominously as we settled into our room, but fatigue washed over us like a warm blanket, and we fell asleep quickly. I was awakened in the middle of the night with a loud knock on my door. I listened intently, with my heart running. The voice of the motel owner sounded from the other side. "You need to leave. I want this room for somebody else." Scared and confused, I turned and saw my mom rise to her feet, her face pale and drawn. She opened the door a crack and confronted him. I could hear the rise of their voices as my mother tried to reason with him that we had already paid for the room, and it was at the middle of the night. The owner's anger only grew stronger with my mom's determination. Scared, I quickly started to gather our stuff, trying not to make any noise. The owner's voice grew more aggressive. Words blurred into a hazy mixture of fear. I glanced out the window, hoping for something that looked reassuring. Instead, I saw something that would stay with me for many years. Then, out of nowhere, up came about half a dozen bikers, their leather vests glinting under the dim motel lights. Coming out of the night like wolves in a pack, they besieged the owner with an air of fierceness. I could hear their deep voices outside again, resuming the harassment to demand that he let us take one of his rooms for the night. "She's paid to be here," one of them shouted, stepping forward in a menacing manner. "You're gonna let her stay tonight. We don't ever want to hear shit like this from you again." The owner stammered over his words. Intimidated, "I don't want any trouble," he pleaded, voice shaking. I turned back to Mom, who was watching the whole scene turn into a confrontation with an expression on her face of fear, mixed with relief. We continued crouching by the window, hearing the bikers continue to intimidate the owner as their screams filled the night air. It felt so surreal, like a movie scene. I couldn't believe this was actually happening. After a few tense minutes, bikers vanished as quickly as they had appeared, into the night's darkness, leaving the owner speechless in shock. My mom closed the door and leaned her body against it, letting out a deep exhalation. We did not sleep well that night. Even after so long, the adrenaline still runs through our veins. The chaos had shaken us. It felt better being there than getting back in the car. Checkout the next morning was weirdly normal. No mention of events from the previous night, nor any trace of the owner's anger or bikers' intervention. It was as if all had come back to grayness in the motel routine. While driving away, I felt this overwhelming sensation that we really did escape something dark and dangerous out there. The bikers were our unexpected guardian angels, but it was an encounter that sent shivers down my spine. That night taught me that not everything is just exactly as it appears, especially in the middle of nowhere. And sometimes help does come from the most unlikely of sources.